Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Back with us today is meteorologist Greg Soulje, and you may recognize Greg from being on with us. He comes on with us every month here on Feedstuffs 365, or perhaps you've caught one of Greg's weather forecasts on This Week in Agribusiness on RFD TV or a number of other stations across the nation. Welcome, Greg. Great to have you with us today.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Nice to be with you on a gorgeous, at least the day we put this broadcast together, phenomenal. Hard to believe it's February 21st day across the Midwest.
Exactly. Before we get started, I want to remind those of you that are joining us here online to post any questions you might have for Greg there in the chat on your screen. If you're joining us from social media, you can post directly in those channels. So yeah, it's an amazing day. It's been an amazing almost a week now, I guess. I've lost track. I'm ready. Is winter over, Greg? We're into spring here in the Midwest. We're seeing 50s, 60s, and I heard like 65 or something in Des Moines today. So what are we looking forward to here?
Yeah, the past few days, really through the month of February so far, we've seen such a dynamic pendulum swing of weather this wintertime season, but it's not all that unusual. It's pretty much on the target from what we've talked about here on this broadcast and This Week in Agribusiness and on the radio, that it's an El Nino year. It's a moderate to strong one. So, spells of winter would be short-lived, not exclusively gone, but short-lived. Same with winter precip snow. And it is amazing, not only these temperatures that are going to be record-setting here, and it's just to the degree of really drought improvement, snow melt, the lack of snow. And it's basically, for all intents and purposes, really has been a positive for whether you're in the production business on row crops or the livestock sector. We haven't had anything too dramatic. It's been very manageable. Footing has been generally acceptable for equipment and livestock. So all in all, it's been a fairly good go of it. But to answer your question, I don't think we're done with winter. This is not the way the springtime season goes. We have, no matter what that critter back on February 2nd said. So we're going to be looking at the pendulum swing, but that's the trademark of springtime around here. And we'll get into the details of the spring outlook and maybe even a sneak peek at summertime around here as we move through this session.
Very good. So are we seeing somewhat of a fading El Nino then? I mean, I'm kind of hearing reports that might be happening.
Yeah, that we are expected to see that here in the next couple of 2 or 3 months. As a matter of fact, if we take a little snapshot here of water temperatures across the Central Pacific, and basically pretty straightforward when you see this corridor, this ribbon right around and centered on the equator, that line of 0 right in the middle of the page in the graphic here. There is your body of water that is still running about 1.5 degrees, 2.5, some spots almost close to 3 degrees above average. Some people would think no big deal, but from an atmospheric standpoint, remember the planet, 3/4 of it's made up of water, and the Pacific from west to east where the systems come. This is certainly a direct influence on how weather has behaved here for over the past 4, 5, 6 months. But we do see, as you look kind of in the western end of that graphic, into the northeastern corner of Australia, that is, in Indonesia, water's beginning to cool a little bit. And so we anticipate here between April and June a transition back into what we call a neutral atmosphere, an average atmosphere. There's no El Nino, no La Nina, kind of an average water temperature makeup within about 0.5 degree of average across the Central Pacific. So just to show that the process is just beginning, but it's not a pendulum swing immediately or ping pong balls in the atmosphere. We do foresee a gradual transition. It will take several months to get this back into this neutral state. But again, as a precursor to how things have played on out, when we take a look at the most recent drought monitor, boy, I tell you, that is a big, big improvement. And we were able to accomplish that of all seasons, of all months here in early to midwinter. In the month of January, there were some spots in central Illinois that had 5 inches of rain. not snow. That's rain that came on down. That sure helped. To talk to the producer that came to visit with us at a speaking engagement a couple of weeks ago in Champaign. He was up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Their most significant moisture this wintertime season, and it kind of goes to the other side of the equation here. Their most significant moisture maker was a rain event around Christmas time of a couple of inches, and that opens up the can of worms for not only drought improvement in the Midwest, but drought worsening, which is getting underway into the far upper Midwest, northern plains, and southern Canadian Prairie. We still have this area through western Iowa, but again, as some folks who were out at Coralville, Iowa, who might have gotten stuck in that snow, 15 inches worth. That snow certainly has helped with the drought situation across the western Corn Belt. The most recent storms across the Southwest and the flooding in Southern California past couple of days should improve with time the drought in the southwestern sections of the country. And again, we've basically eroded away anything of substance in the southeastern part of the country, down through the lower Mississippi Valley, Tennessee Valley. Improvement there despite severe weather, and there'll be more drought improvement. And actually, there's some production going on, some corn planting in southern sections of Texas and some of the drier areas of the central Gulf Coast region. Some field work is beginning in that particular part of the country. So some fairly good news with respect to dryness and drought. This was the outlook from the folks at the Weather Service back in the end portion of January for the month of February. And they basically have hit the nail on the head. We'll give them credit here on this go around. Same with the Southern Corn Belt. Still lacking, though, the improvement that was forecast over the southwestern part of the country. It's coming, but that was maybe a little over exuberant on some of their forecast models in that particular part of the country. They were thinking some drought, at least worsening into some areas of the western Corn Belt. They basically hold sway, if not improved out there. So some good news there. And if you go forward now, the folks at the Weather Service, again, this came out about the mid-stretch of February, saying again and expecting from their vantage point drought improvement for the western Corn Belt. We think we can go along with that. We don't foresee much improvement, and we agree with the southwestern part of the country. What is dominant, and I think this should begin to be making headlines, is the increasing dryness and drought concerns. And this is usually a trademark that a weakening El Nino of maybe some dryness and drought concerns in the northernmost corn belt, the northernmost plains, that Red River Valley of the north. When you typically, Sarah, go into a kind of a spring snow melt and flood melt season, I don't foresee that happening, but at the same time, there may be kind of a return to the drought pattern, maybe the fire pattern with time in the southern Canadian prairie. So that's the drought update. And again, pretty remarkable that for the month of January, the mid-stretch of wintertime, we had improvement in the drought pattern across the good part of the central portions of the country.
Good news indeed. What about snowpack? Or you got any info for us there?
Yes, exactly. And we'll get into that in first a second. Just a quick little current weather pattern. Here's our usual spaghetti lines of green movement to weather systems west to east over the next 5 days. You see just basically everything west to east. You can see a basic northern branch where the jet stream is compacted and buckled, that U-shaped configuration up through western Canada. It swings into the central U.S. By the time we get to the 27th and 28th of February. And so two things here. We see kind of a winding down of some of the record-setting heat. The warmth will continue on, but also that northern branch of the jet, that buckling through western Canada, is an indicator that, there are some colder days, more seasonal days ahead. This is not the start and official ramping up of springtime or the conclusion of the winter season. You can see a pretty impressive system through that western Canadian prairie, dropping into the plain states and across the Corn Belt as we wind down through the last couple of days of the month of February around here. And again, a change to some cooler air, still above average temperatures, more rain than anything, but we do see on that system over the plain states, Sarah, over the course of the 27th, 28th, maybe some snowfall and colder air potential for some of those folks across the upper Midwest and northern plains from a livestock perspective. There's a quick look at precip, another significant moisture maker for the eastern Corn Belt. I tell you, the California region, Pacific Northwest has been on the shorter side of snow and rain this season, but there's been some improvement in the past couple of systems. But Sarah, in that San Joaquin and Imperial Valley area of California, flooding rainfall, and you normally don't see that, and even a strong El Nino setup. So some issues in some of those ag areas over sections of Southern California. Now on to the snowpack and snow cover here. You can see here by back on the 16th of January when we last met, this is just kind of a broad brush area of the country. If you had an inch or more snow, you get plotted in white here. So there's mid-January, and look at here we are in mid-February, down to, I don't know, maybe 15 to less than 20% of the country in some sense of snowpack and snow cover. And it's really confined through the Rockies, parts of the Cascades, a good chunk of the Sierra, and that stripe that we see through the Dakotas of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, I'm sure, is going to be and will continue to melt away. So we're putting the moisture back in the ground. That certainly helps. But we talked about this, I believe, last time, where we were concerned about river levels into the Mississippi, Missouri, and the Red River Valley of the North. And if we continue to hold that thought of dryness and drought more with time in those particular parts of the country, there'll be some weather systems to come on through. I think this is a story that will continue to be with us here going forward for the next few weeks and months. Here is a quick look at the actual snowpack and snow cover across the country as of mid-January. Those deeper hues of blue and purple out of eastern Iowa. That was right around the good old Farm Futures get-together in Coralville, 10 to 15 inches out there. Mike Pearson certainly reported in on that. Back to the weather office here. In any event, northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, Michigan, we had snow as far south as eastern sections of Texas. Advance in a month. There you go. And what's left there out of areas north of the Sioux Empire region of the Twin Cities to maybe around north and west of Lambeau Field, that's melting away. So it is just a phenomenal setup, but again, should not be all that surprising considering the degree of El Nino weather conditions and the strength across the country. Here we go, Sarah. We'll take a look now going forward here the next 6 to 10 days, the next 8 to 14 days, kind of an averaging and modeling. I go a lot of lines here, but the green lines are the steering currents or moving weather systems. You can see some dashed blue lines through the western Canadian prairies, some sense of cooling aloft that will reach the surface as well. That takes us through the first day of March in the beginning of meteorological springtime, and the jet stream is buckling more in that northern Pacific up through Alaska and western Canada. You can see those red dashed lines out the western and northern Pacific, still indicating warmth at the surface and up aloft in the atmosphere, a reflection of some of those warm surface temperatures, water temperatures across the westernmost reaches of the Pacific. But it's more of a west to east, but we're watching that buckle through the Gulf of Alaska. So that tells us that there's colder air on the move. We're not done with winter time. There'll be a realignment of the upper air going forward over the next 2 or 3 weeks across North America. And prior to that, though, again, the 6 to 10 day, this is no surprise for most of folks, probably another run despite the cool off slated here. In the coming days, there's another run. It's a record and probably near record setting warmth as we wind our way through the end of February, beginning part of March. There's the moisture outlook, again, from the feds, significant for the Pacific Northwest. Good news there. Desert Southwest, good news there. And more probably rain. If it's snow, it's wet snow. It's confined to the northern and western Corn Belt locales. The outlook through the beginning part of March, the first 4 or 5 days, and there's a moisture pattern as well. We continue to see activity across sections of California. So, Sarah, there you have it from the feds. Ready for our perspective?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay, here we go for the waning days of February to March. Really no big surprise if you can forecast. I'll tell you, if you can't forecast, this is a no-brainer. Should be able to put something like this together. This is the rest of winter here in the beginning part of March. The warm split jet stream pattern through California, southern Canadian prairie. So we do move into a shot of cold, then we're back into the El Nino setup. So 2 rounds of this back and forth stuff with the temperatures a bit below average down through Oklahoma, Texas, the southwestern part of the country. Meanwhile, the weather pattern is still very active. Systems move into California. They either get split off, they ride up into the upper Midwest, in through the Northeast and New England, or they take the run down across the southern reaches of the country and move into the southeastern part of the country. Severe weather usually gets going this time of the year. It's already done so during the winter season. We'll see it get going from the Tennessee Valley in the southeastern states, but there should be some opportunity for additional field work in the deep southern parts of the country. More moisture. California, Pacific Northwest, good news there. We think probably some late season snow for the upper Midwest, northern parts of the Corn Belt into areas of the St. Lawrence River Valley, and probably just plain old rain over a good part of the central and southern Corn Belt locales going forward into the beginning part of March. Now, here is that change. Here is that lobe that we were we're talking about that cold air return. We're not done with winter. Spring is not here to stay, despite the critter. Here is the change back into mid to late March. And yeah, we do have fieldwork operations going. We keep an eye on emerging winter wheat out of the southern plains if it hasn't popped up already in that warmth down there. Warmth, by the way, over the eastern third of the country. Temperatures about normal across the heart of the Corn Belt. Again, there's a change of some cold air, but it's a progressive weather pattern. Nonetheless, we see this jet stream pattern in that U-shaped configuration get some late season snows. Snows in March in the western states. It snows in the upper Midwest. Nothing unusual here, but you can see the track of weather systems through California down to the Oklahoma Panhandle, riding up into the St. Lawrence River Valley. And on the warmer side of the jet, that would be running from about the Motor City down to the Metroplex. Probably some severe weather potential there. So as you would expect, Sarah, nothing too unusual for March as we see it right now across a good part of the country. It comes in a line, like a line, out like a lamb, however you go with that saying. I get lost with it. In any event, it ought to behave, walk, talk much like it should be for early springtime across the country.
Sometimes March snows can be pretty significant. Are you seeing that?
Yeah. Sometimes it can, especially from livestock operations. I think we have calving operations going already. Luckily, I think by and large we're going to be okay, except for later on next week. But going forward here, as we get into the month of April, we see this dramatic pattern shift expected to evolve. Again, we talk about a progressive nature to the weather. It's not stagnant. It's not staying in one spot. We're not getting storm after storm after storm. So you may have the hankering, and every year when I'm on the radio, I get someone that gets in touch with me and says they're out there doing corn planting or some kind of planting into parts of northern and central Illinois. Why? I don't know. I don't understand that early, but in any event, for folks who do have the desire to get out there and from livestock operations as well, back west to the Missouri, a nice run of some bio-Pacific air. Jet stream moves back north up into the southern Canadian prairie, drops on southward into the eastern third of the country, but at least we don't have any of that supercharged Arctic air coming southward. So that's good news. That should be on the wane and continue to remain up north of the St. Lawrence River Valley. Precipitation, good news. Again, if you want to try to get out there, well, it's really kind of a double-edged sword. Good news from a dry down and drying and firming a soil standpoint with heavier equipment in mind and moving feed and supplies and livestock around over the Corn Belt locales. Maybe not necessarily the good news that we want to talk about. And over the upper Midwest, the northern plains. This is probably a precursor to something that we'll be watching here in the weeks and months to come, expanding dryness and drought for the northern and eastern Dakotas, areas from the Twin Cities on northward and east from there. Meanwhile, one more El Nino system through Southern California, the Southwest Texas, or the southeastern part of the country, probably delaying field work in the southeast, but drought improvement and some moisture for emerging winter grains on the southern plains, and can take anything they can get in the southwestern sections of the country. So if we go forward here into the end portion of April and beginning to early parts, the middle parts of May, overall, that weather pattern is going to be a busy one as it applies to cold air because it's back into play, but up north towards the Sioux. There's no real southward penetration on it. It retreats on northward. It stays there. It's a fast west and east jet stream pattern. This is kind of almost a more typical, normal atmospheric setup of the stirring currents west to east for late April into mid-May over the Pacific Northwest through the central Corn Belt. So we get some warmth in the southwestern part of the country, warmth in the southern plains, southeastern states. It's a weakening El Nino setup over the southeastern, actually over the hemisphere, I should say, and opportunities, again, to get some warmth into the soils and probably some element and some degree of field work, I think. And if you needed it to rain, wanted it to rain, we get it where we do need the rain into the western Corn Belt areas, the Great Plains, and still kind of a wetter scenario in the southern Corn Belt sections, but otherwise, weather kind of behaving average, normal, typical stuff for late May, late April into early to mid-May across the heart of the Corn Belt locales. So that's the story up to that point, Sarah, where we anticipate nothing too headline-ish, if you will, with the exception of some of those dry areas up, again, in the spring grain areas, southern Canadian prairie, sugar beet areas of the Red River Valley of the North, and areas north of the Twin Cities. Most everyone else should be able to go at it. I had a producer asked me at a speaking engagement with Alana IFS in Champaign a couple of weeks ago, well, what is it? We're going to be out there how are we going to do it? I said, you're going to be out there more often than not, and moisture will be a little lesser than usual. Maybe not necessarily totals, but the frequency and the opportunity for field work should be there, and then some as we get going into the spring field work season across much of the Corn Belt.
Have you taken a look at summer at all?
We have. And going forward here into at least what's left is the springtime over the Corn Belt areas, actually much of the country, we've got still one final lobe of cold air up through Hudson Bay, James Bay, that particular area. No sign of it really coming southward. Some lingering cool air through Michigan, the Northeast, New England. Any early season heat, if you will, is really nothing out of control. No record-breaking stuff. Nothing that's going to cause a rapid snow melt to get underway through California, where we sort of deplete what's running about 80% of normal and about a 15 to 20 inch water equivalency of some of the meltwater coming off the Sierra. So we keep an eye on that. But there's warmth through California, the western part of Texas, the Cotton Belt country, and down through the southeastern sections of the country. Meanwhile, from a precip standpoint, we can work with this. No problem at all. A little wetter in the easternmost Corn Belt, normal precip over the remainder. Now, remember, folks, typical normal week's worth of rain for the Corn Belt and the Central Plains areas is about a half to general leaning more closer to about 3/4 of an inch. So if we keep that pace going and we move into the start of the spring planting season with soil moisture kind of adequate, we're back to normal. General improvement in the western Corn Belt locales. Again, that's why we are kind of optimistic on the opportunities for it to get out there, maybe a little earlier than usual, but at least on a normal pace and no substantial delays anticipated the way we see it going into mid to late May and early June across the Corn Belt, the Plain States areas, even the winter wheat belt, despite the range of temperatures, Sarah, and the lack of snow cover. Remember, we had some pretty cold air back in the very beginning part before the warmth got going to plains, and we were concerned about winter wheat. But as a whole, the general consensus, the gut feel, if you will, that the winter wheat belt is in better shape, despite ongoing dryness and drought concerns, is still in relatively good shape, better shape than it has been in years gone by. Now, are you ready for that summer outlook?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay,
I'm
here
ready.
we go. It's just kind of a general summation now. Summertime, you get these thunderstorms, and basically a rule of thumb, if you don't get any organized rain by mid to late May in the central and southern plains, it takes on more of a Mediterranean climate. It's all or nothing on thunderstorms. But in any event, here's our thinking on June, July, and August. It's kind of compacted. I don't like doing these maps a lot of times because this is 90 days of thunderstorms or no thunderstorms. But the general thought is for temperatures on average to be about average. We'll have our spikes, we'll have our cool spells, we'll have our spells of heat, we'll get it to come on down, but there's nothing that appears to be terribly long lasting and locked in from a temp standpoint as an ongoing long-term multi-week heat waves, we'll put it that way, across a good part of the country. There would be some semblance of heat in California, the Pacific Northwest, not unusual. That's kind of textbook stuff. And over the deep south and southeastern part of the country, a couple of few degrees above average. No big deal there. That's pretty much par for the course. We do see some slower development maybe in the northernmost Corn Belt locales. And again, if we're going to put some cooler than average weather into the Canadian prairie, but at the same time put up this kind of scenario with precip about normal to a bit below, we should be relatively okay, even with some sense of dryness and drought-ish weather trying to get going in the southern Canadian prairie, at least the main key spring grain areas. And precip, we think, is going to be relatively well with opportunities for just daytime heating to get thunderstorms to bubble up over the plains. There'll be a propensity for weather systems to probably impact with a somewhat wetter scenario, basically I-70-ish or maybe to I-80 and then south to the Ohio into that part of the Corn Belt with a wet scenario and a humid forecast for the southeastern part of the country. If you had to keep it on the fire risk and the lack of at least any northward start to the monsoon season, that would be probably into California and the Pacific Northwest. So that is kind of the snapshot. Again, I don't usually like doing, especially in summertime, these kind of 30 and 90 day, the 60, 90 day maps work better usually in the colder climate time of the year, colder scenario. But for our purposes here, basically what we're trying to get along and communicate is going to be probably just a normal, typical, standard functioning spring planting and summer season across the key areas of the plains and especially the Corn Belt locales. I personally don't see any long-lasting headlines going on. That's some of the discussions points that we have talked about on the radio. We were at Champaign a couple of weeks ago for a presentation, conveyed those thoughts as well. So I think going forward, we should be in much better condition and shape soil moisture-wise. Opportunities for spring planting. Livestock ought to be in relatively good order as well. I don't see anything major going on across the plains and Corn Belt. And for that matter, over down through the Cotton Belt as well, down through Dixie in the southeastern part of the country. It should be pretty much textbook stuff, if you will, going forward for a springtime and the summertime season.
A little more winter left, but nothing too severe in terms of what you're kind of telling us. And we've all downloaded those summer maps. So we're going to hold you to that too, because that was
please do. Somebody had asked me at the in Champaign a couple of weeks ago, well, what's your confidence level in this stuff? So, I wouldn't put it on TV or the internet or talk about it on radio if I wasn't confident enough. Why would I put something I'm not confident in on there? So we had some fun with it, but if you see it, then we have grade A confidence of what we're forecasting here.
Very good. And Greg does a column for Feedstuffs too. So you can find that on feedstuffs.com in our Feedstuffs daily newsletter. So you can watch for that in addition to our monthly discussions with Greg. So if you have any last minute questions, be sure to put those up there. But otherwise, any kind of final thoughts you want to leave us with here today, Greg?
Just because we've got this spell of record-setting warmth, and you're running around in shirt sleeves, and more power to you. And livestock are enjoying it as well, I'm sure. Again, this is just a little precursor of springtime. It is not the pattern shift. It is not a lockdown into spring mode around here. We do have winter coming, and it probably comes to a shock to the system for man and beast, but it is what it is. It will be a progressive setup, probably more quieter days and milder days versus this anything resembling harsh winter conditions. But things can change when you get these temperature swings of 30 and 40 degrees out of the plains. You go from rain and wind, or dry time and wind on the plains, back into cold and snow, and a wet packing snow sometimes this time of the year. That can be an issue on livestock as well. So just basically behaving once we get out of the next couple of 2 or 3 weeks and get deeper into March and April, and pretty much normal, typical, average stuff for the plains and Corn Belt locales for the springtime season.
But don't put those winter coats and sweaters away quite yet.
That's right. Keep the mucklucks, the boots, and livestock as well. As we say once in a while on the radio, the other boot and hoof will once in a while drop.
There you go. So there you have it, folks. Thank you so much for joining us today, Greg. Always a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. And always we'll look forward to our next get together in a month. Otherwise, check us out on the radio, and of course with Max and Mike on This Week in Agribusiness.
Exactly. Likewise, we appreciate all of you joining with us today. A reminder that all Feedstuffs 365 segments are available at feedstuffs.com. So until next time, for Feedstuffs, I'm Sarah Muirhead.